Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for this professor panel hosted by the Cornell Undergraduate Research Board's Peer Mentorship Program. We're so incredibly excited to everyone here and to be joined by a panel of incredible professors who are doing research in so many different diverse fields. So I just want to go ahead and talk quickly about the format of this panel. So we're going to go ahead and get started with them introductions. And then we'll have quick talks/presentations by each panelist, which they'll get to talk more about their research. And then we'll move on to some prepared questions regarding how undergraduates can get involved in research. And then right at the end, we'll have an open Q&A, and you can go ahead and use Zoom to submit questions then. So very quickly, also this panel is also hosted by the PMP. So I want to very quickly talk about who we are as a program. So to take 20 seconds to do that. So we're just a club that runs each semester, and we help mentees get paired up with upperclassmen who already do research. So we basically help people who want to get involved in research do so. And if you want to learn more, you can go ahead and check out our website as well. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. My name is RC, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Peer Mentorship Program. And another person that works on me on PMP is Victoria. So Victoria, can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Victoria. I'm a junior chemistry major at Cornell with a minor in German studies. Also PMP co-chair with RCN, and we have been for quite a few semesters now. We're super excited to be hosting the second semi-annual professor panel, and we're super excited to be welcoming all these amazing professors who've been conducting really novel and cool research. So without further ado, if you'd like to introduce yourselves.
Yep, and we can go ahead and go in this order, and then we'll circle back around to the longer presentations on this order as well.
Okay, so I'll start. My name is Matthew Saleh. I teach 3 courses in the disability studies track at Cornell. So I teach the disability law class, the global comparative disability policy class, and a course called disability and employment policy. And then I also teach at the School of Continuing Ed a course on prisons, so on mass incarceration. And that is fitting because my research, I went to law school and then got a PhD in education policy. So I actually do kind of have a joint interest in disability studies around education and employment rights issues, but then also increasingly I look at issues of disability and justice involvement in the criminal justice system. My research, so I also am a research associate at the Yang Tan Institute on Employment and Disability. So we actually have a bunch of grants that we work on. So there's actually quite a few opportunities to work for the Yang Tan Institute if anyone's interested. So it's there, for instance, I have one grant from the state of New York where we look at criminal justice involvement for youth with developmental disabilities in New York State. So that's one example that we do. We have a few federal grants that look more at things like school to work transition for youth with disabilities. I tend to focus on youth and young adults myself. But in terms of what types of research I do, it's a lot of it. I try to blend my legal focus and my legal studies with more empirical approaches. So things like surveys and focus groups. And I tend to think of myself as a mixed methods researcher. So I try to blend, where possible, quantitative and qualitative methods. I guess the last thing I'll say is that I do try to work with students as often as possible. I'm faculty advisor of the Mock Trial Association, the Undergraduate Mock Trial Association. I am a faculty sponsor for 3 Laidlaw Scholars this year. And I also work with summer fellows every year. So and do independent studies and advise internships and things like that. So wherever possible, I do try to bring students into my work as authors or things like that. So I think it's fitting. And I have one other project, but I want to make sure everybody else has time to talk. So I'll save that for the later part.
Yeah, awesome. Professor Ghosh, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Durba Ghosh, and I'm faculty in the history department, and I'm also cross-listed in feminist, gender, and sexuality studies and in Asian studies. I'm currently directing a brand new program called the Humanities Scholars Program, and the program is designed in some ways to support students from across the university who are majoring or minoring in a humanities field to do a senior capstone project. So I'm really, really grateful to Kurt for inviting me today. We just went through a cycle of applications for the new cohort of undergraduates. So we'll have 30 new folks joining us in the fall as juniors. We've just had a group of 30 go through. They just started this year, and I've been working with them in a methods research seminar, basically helping and supporting them develop their own research project using materials that are available on campus. So we've done visits with the Rare Manuscripts collection. We've done a visit to the Art Museum. We've been to the Costume Textile collection in Human Ecology. We have done a trip to the MAP collection. We've done a trip to the Human Sexuality collection. I think a lot of folks don't know what humanities research is, and so the program is designed to make it possible for you to imagine what it looks like, particularly for students who are thinking interdisciplinarily, right? And what I hear in Professor Saleh's research is someone who went to law school and then got a PhD and has a whole set of interests. And so one of the goals of the program is to really support interests that are across different disciplines. If I have a minute, can I just share what I'm working on? Because I'm so excited about it because it's current, and usually the history that I work on is not that current. So I'll just.
Yeah, definitely. Go ahead. That would be awesome.
Okay, cool. Let me just share. So I'm working on this project, which might seem a little arcane, but it's actually turned into a really interesting project. I did a talk on it in fall 2019, and it's called Moving Monuments. And one of the things that I've been learning as I'm doing this project, as these monuments are toppled or taken down or vandalized, is that most of these monuments are relatively recent. So nearly all of them were put up in the last 100 or 150 years. There really weren't monuments like this until after the Napoleonic War. And in fact, a lot of these monuments are installed as a way of showing the permanence of the regime. And so they're often installed because the regime is in question. And so this image you see looks like a march. It's an image in Delhi. It's Prince Edward, Prince of Wales in 1921 at the installation. You see this little equestrian statue in the back. At the moment of very violent anti-colonial protests in India, the British decided to install this ginormous monument. So that's what I've been looking at. I'll just show you a couple of other things I've realized. One is that we often think of monuments as being unique or one-off, but it turns out they're replicated. And often monuments are meant to link the center of the empire, London, with places elsewhere. So this is a monument on Waterloo Place. And if you know London at all, it's basically down the street from Piccadilly Circus. There's a kind of row of monuments. I won't tell you about all of them, but this is John Lawrence, who is one of the military figures who puts down the 1857 mutiny. And he's also installed in another place in India. I'll let you read this quote. He's installed in another place in South Asia, and when India becomes independent, there's some concern that these monuments will be vandalized and defaced. But the government decides that they're not going to move the monuments. It is later that the governments of India and Pakistan decide that the monuments are not really worth the trouble. And they say, if you can pay to take them away, we'll let you take them away. And so you see here the government is saying, we're going to protect the statues. It's how they're sort of saying we're a viable government, but they remove them basically so that they won't be vandalized. And so this is the Lawrence statue. It's the exact replica of the one that's in London, and it's placed in Lahore. And this is a kind of photograph of it. The reason I'm sharing this with you is the takeaway here is it's not in Lahore anymore. It's actually in Ireland. And so here you can see that it's been removed to Ireland. And you can see another replica on the right, same statue, but attributed to a different person. So I'll stop the share because I don't want to take up too much time, but this is the kind of research I'm working on. And I'm actually working with a group of students to think about the monuments that we have on the Cornell campus and whether we should keep them, right? Whether some of you probably walk through the arts quad and you know that Ezra Cornell is on one side and 80 White is on the other, right? I can never remember which is which, but the group of students I'm working with right now is looking through the archives to kind of work out why those monuments were constructed and you know, what the rationale was. So I'll stop there and wait till the Q&A, but thank you again.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. That was amazing to hear more about your research. Professor Foster, if you wanted to say a few words about your research, and feel free to share any slides if you have any.
Great. So like everyone said, I've working with undergrads on research has been one of the real joys of being at Cornell. I've been here about 10 years. And for me, I started out actually working with undergrads. Before I had any PhD students, this former biology major walked in my office and said, "I'm thinking of being a CS major. And I like to, you know, work on the kinds of stuff you do." And I said, "Great, let's work together." And we ended up writing, I think, my first 3 papers at Cornell. He was a co-author on. It was a wonderful collaboration. And so, yeah, I've always tried to seek to create opportunities for undergrads, both over the summer and during the year. I thought I would just share this. Let me see if I can, sorry, let me just share it in a window. You'd think after a year of Zoom, I would know how to do this quickly. There we go. So yeah, this is a project that we just published in January. I'll tell you what all these words mean, but what we're doing is we're building essentially a sort of clean and correct software foundation for computer networks. And what's remarkable is, so the place where this was published is one of the more competitive and prestigious and oldest publication venues in computer science. And it had the most authors and actually the most diverse group of authors, because 7 of the co-authors were all undergraduates. So this work was done over about 2 years. It's a pretty massive undertaking. And the names that I've highlighted here are all the undergrad contributors to the work. So what we're doing is we're trying to sort of build software and hardware for systems like the internet that have better properties than kind of what the status quo is. And so one of the words from our title is this term data plane. If you don't know what the data plane is, the data plane is sort of the part of a network that actually moves your data, from one computer to another. So this flamingo over here on the right, maybe wanting to order dinner from shrimp.net, it's going to open up a web browser, and there's going to be some communication that happens going across, some things like maybe a Wi-Fi card, and then maybe some routers, and all the way over to some data center where the server is. And these data planes, they've actually been around, well, you can go all the way back to the ancient Greeks. They had communication systems that had a data plane, but really since the start of the internet in the 60s, there's been some groups, some international organizations that develop standards for how these data planes should work. And that's really important because the internet needs to connect, networks in different countries, and networks that work over radio signals or optical cables or electrical cables. So there's all kinds of work in developing better protocols and making these things standardized. And there's a group called the Ietf. It's actually, if you're a social scientist, I think it'd be fascinating to study how the Ietf works. They are the body that sort of formalizes and determines the protocols that run on the internet. And they have this wonderful slogan. It's due to a person named Dave Clark. Dave's at MIT and was sort of one of the people who developed the internet protocols. And the slogan is, "We believe in rough consensus and running code." And so there's a lot in that sentence. What it means is, they didn't go off and sort of write down very precise mathematical descriptions of how internet protocols worked. Instead, they'd sort of, hash it out. They'd all get together in a room and hash out what they thought should be there. And they'd write it down in some English document. And then they'd go off and implement it. Different groups would implement it independently. And they'd be happy when those different implementations could interoperate. So if a group from MIT and a group from Cornell could go off, read this English document, and then produce some code that could actually send data between them, that would be good. So this has kind of been how the internet's evolved over several decades. But increasingly, networks are getting kind of fancier and more complicated. I'll spare you some of the details, but the systems that power sites like Google or Facebook or Amazon, even Cornell, there are these massive data centers with hundreds of thousands of computers all connected by a fast network internally, and then also by a fast network coming to your cell phone or to your laptop. And so there's a whole bunch of engineering that's happened to make these networks better. And it's basically sort of flown the Ietf nest. People are not waiting for this kind of old standards body and this old way of developing networks to proceed. And so what's happening is that people are writing sort of custom code, like companies like Google have sort of developed their own protocols, which are not always the same as internet standards, and they're deploying them. And because they have control over so much of the infrastructure, they can do that very quickly. So the problem that we're trying to solve is to understand, like, in a world where these protocols are evolving very quickly, how do we know they're correct? And right now, there's not really a basis for doing that. And so what our system does, I'll stop very soon, is we basically took a very kind of mathematical and kind of classical approach to how you build software, and took a programming language called P4, which is kind of a lingua franca for describing these protocols. And we built both a reference implementation of that language as well as a mathematical model. And so with these two things, you could start to take some of the protocols, say that a company is producing, and rapidly prototype it and prove some theorems about it. And so this is kind of exciting because it connects the area of networks to a bunch of other parts of computer science, being able to reason about programs, prove them correct, being able to build artifacts that we can trust. So if you look at the headlines, you might have seen all this concern about 5G and sort of which country is going to control different internet standards. A lot of that's actually about understanding that network equipment that you might buy from a vendor in one country or another, actually does what it says and is not going to do something like snoop on all your traffic or have an internal kill switch that someone can trigger from the outside and take down your country's internet. So having verified implementations would give us some assurance that's not the case. So I'll stop there. That's kind of a taste of what we're doing. And again, I just want to go back to the beginning and say this was, a gargantuan effort. We basically took this very large language and built actually multiple versions of it, connected the two, and this was all done, largely through the effort of these wonderful undergrads.
Amazing. Thank you, Professor Saleh, Ghosh, and Foster. Thank you so much for talking more about your research and giving us a taste of what you work on. It was really amazing to hear what you've been up to this past semester and over your time here. Yeah, so we're supposed to be joined by Professor August as well, but I believe he's running a little late currently. So we'll go ahead and transition to the prepared questions. Yeah. You just go ahead and share my screen. And right, awesome. So one question that always comes up during the Peer Mentorship Program, and a lot of my friends who have been trying to get involved in research also struggle with, and this particular question I think gives a lot of people a lot of anxiety. So when should a person who's looking to get involved in research really start, and is there a right time to do so? And why don't we go ahead and start off with Professor Saleh, if you have any opinions on this.
Yeah, so this is a great question, first of all. Second of all, yeah, so I think personally, I don't think it's ever too early to start thinking about getting into research, especially if you think you have a passion for it. I actually studied political science as an undergrad, and I wish that there was, at the university I had gone to, there was more of a focus on research rather than just kind of reading theory and stuff like that, which is important. I love theory, and to a certain extent consider myself a theorist, but I think, and you can do research that is also theory, so I want to be clear about that. But I think, there's all kinds of different ways to do research, and some of them are more inclusive and less alienating than others. And so I think it's good to, you can see with the two other panelists here, there's so many different and interesting ways to come into these, the idea of figuring out what you find interesting, how you can explore it, what kind of empirical methods you want to use. So I would say, in the spirit of what some of the other panelists have said, reach out to teachers or professors that you have, and and just see what maybe even if they can't work with you directly, they can refer you to someone who does want to. Be clear with them about what you're interested in looking into, and a lot of us know other people that are doing quite different things than ourselves. So I think I personally don't think it's ever too early, and I think what research is it's broader than it's often conveyed, right? There's a lot of things qualify as research, just like a lot of things qualify as data. We think of data as just numbers, right? But it can be many different things. So I think I would say it's always good to be exploring, who you can work with and what kind of new ways you can investigate things that are of interest to you.
Professor Ghosh, do you have anything to add?
Sure, just real quick. One of the things I'll just say is that a lot of you are taking first-year writing seminars, and often a component of that is doing some kind of research project. So I think start whenever it feels right. I don't know that there's a right or a wrong time, but certainly the first year, a lot of you will have that opportunity, especially in the humanities. The other thing I would just say is that my experience of having worked with students who were in the history honors program or supervising students in feminist, gender, and sexuality studies is that often the students that do really well at research are not the students that are doing really well on tests. And that often the students who are doing well at research think at a tangent or orthogonally, are more independent, or take the initiative, or motivated. And so I really resist the idea that only honors students do research, because I think often honors students are the ones that we define that by GPA. That's often not a very good indicator of who's going to be a good researcher. And so I think what I would say is, if you're interested in research, investigate, talk to your faculty members, talk to graduate students, talk to the postdocs in your programs, figure out a way to move yourself forward without looking for external validation. Because one of the things I think we all know about research is that you do a lot of work before there is some external validation, but you learn a lot, which is really great. So I'll just stop there.
Yeah,
I'll
awesome.
jump in with a couple. I just want to add a couple things that I think just to try not to repeat, but just to add on. I think research is wonderful, and it's wonderful to do as an undergrad because, as Durba said, it's a different kind of intellectual activity. I think of it as the difference in say the sciences as, you're given a problem set. It might be a difficult problem set, but you know that there is an answer, and it's probably an answer that can be obtained by using the skills that you've been taught in lecture. Whereas in research, you might be standing at sort of this cliff trying to figure out which way to jump, and you don't even know what the question is, let alone if it's solvable. So that's just a wonderful thing. It's a challenge. It's a different different set of skills and a different way of kind of being an intellectual that I think everyone should try to experience. And I would also just echo, I think people often are worried about being shy or pushy, and although there are some programs that are very well organized and there's kind of clear on-ramps for how you can get an introduction to research, because research by its nature is so varied, there's no one size fits all, like, here you go, here's the first step. So, talking to your advisor, using your network, talking to people, not just professors, but PhDs and postdocs, we're a great research university. There's thousands of researchers here. And getting that first step can be the hard part, but there's you're trying lots of things and seeing where you can make progress is a good idea. And in terms of being like shy, there are always people who are pushier than you. And I get emails from parents of high schoolers, trying to get research experience for their kids so they can get, have a leg up in admissions. I can guarantee you that there's people who are sort of being pushy. So I would just be pretty bold and knock on lots of doors, send lots of emails, and pursue lots of leads.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives. And Professor August just joined as well, so I wanted to give him a chance to introduce himself and talk a little about his research. Professor August, thank you so much for joining us. I know you were a little late, but it's no problem. Sorry about that. Yeah, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm actually going to stop sharing real quick.
Great. Thanks for inviting me. And again, I apologize for being late. I had a meeting just before this that I had ran over. I'm Avery August. I'm a professor of immunology in the College of Veterinary Medicine. I do research largely around understanding how the immune system functions, particularly interested in lung inflammation caused either by environmental agents such as asthma, allergies, but also infections. We study things like flu infections, and more recently we've started to study SARS-CoV-2, or the virus that causes COVID-19. We use many mouse models for our work, but we do some human work as well. And I do have a number of undergraduate students who work in my laboratory.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah, I wanted to give you a chance to jump in on this first question that we had up just a second ago. So if you had any thoughts to share on this particular one, feel free to jump in.
So it's a great question. I know this is something that, sorry, I didn't hear what the other faculty panelists spoke about, but I will say the right time is when you are at Cornell. Having the opportunity to particularly perform biological sciences research, it takes some time to get to learn how to use equipment, how to think about the work. And so, for example, my group has included freshmen who come in their first semester and start to work with us, and have also included those who are seniors and who have one more semester here at Cornell. And so certainly I try to be as open as possible to hosting students, undergraduate students, for research without thinking about how long they've been here. In some cases, even what their major is. I've had sociology students work in my lab, as well as those who are more traditionally biological sciences or related majors. So the right time is when you're here at Cornell, in my view.
Awesome. Thank you so much for offering all your amazing perspectives. We can go ahead and move on to the next question here. So I think this is something that we can really cover real quickly. I know a lot of you talked a lot about this in your answers to the first question. So we can have two people quickly chime in. I know a lot of people have a lot of anxiety about this question in particular as well.
I can jump in. I think the best way to reach out to faculty typically is email, or back in the days when we were all on campus, to find out when their office hours are and visit them in office hours. I know different colleges have different protocols and expectations around independent study and research. I think it's really important just to find out from the faculty member what their protocol is. I'll just say in the Arts College, we teach a lot. And so a lot of my colleagues say that they really like to work with someone that they've had in class before, that they've had some level of engagement with before, but I know that that's different in different units. So I'll maybe leave the rest of that to the others.
Yeah, I think actually I think we were quite thorough in the answering this question as part of the first prepared question. So I think we can go ahead and move on to the third prepared question. But yeah, thank you so much. So this particular question that was added, I think, this year to the panel, and there's something that also have been a particular point of anxiety for a lot of people, and I wanted to hear your perspectives on this question in particular. Yeah, so why don't we have perhaps Professor August, if you want to chime in first on this question.
Thanks for the question. This is a really important question that obviously is timely with regards to the last year or so. I will say that for the research that we do in my lab, the pandemic has definitely affected undergraduate students. Initially, when we first suspended work, we were not allowed to host undergraduate students back into the lab. And so even the students who were already in the lab had to move to doing research virtually. And so we worked with those students to develop related projects or extensions of their projects where they could use data or some other ways, computational analysis that would allow them to make progress. More recently, we have been allowed to bring those students back. And then this semester, we have been allowed to bring new students into the laboratory. But it's still a concern because we still have the restrictions of COVID that dictate how many people can be in the laboratory. And so I think there's still a hesitation with some faculty about accepting new students, new undergraduate students into their laboratory. Having said that, I believe that going forward, as things hopefully loosen up from the pandemic and everyone gets vaccinated, that this will allow more students to participate in undergraduate research in a research lab setting.
Yeah. And to perhaps get a different perspective on this, Professor Saleh or Foster, do you guys have anything to offer for this question?
I could just say for a lot of the work that I do, not only the pandemic did change how research was done, but it also pretty dramatically changed what type of research is important. So for instance, there was a kind of like an under focus on teleservices and remote service delivery to youth with disabilities before the pandemic. And in the employment context, you could say the same thing. There was kind of this hesitance among employers to think about remote virtual spaces as ideal for people in their workplace, and then actually disproportionately disadvantage people with disabilities. So even though, as Professor August was saying, there are challenges to conducting research in this situation, in a way, in my field, there's also been a bit of a cataclysm in terms of what the imperatives of research are. So we've even pivoted to kind of doing things that are more focused on how inclusive our websites are, and things where we're delivering kind of community-based work to people with disabilities. It's actually, in a way, it not only changed the research, but also changed what we're trying to accomplish with the research. And it's kind of opened new, I don't want to say open new doors like it's a positive thing, but it has kind of undone some of the previous conceptions about the way a built environment needs to look and what kind of spaces need to be constructed as. So there, you can also view it as something that's changed what you might want to investigate, what the future might look like. So.
Sorry. I wanted to just a couple things. So, my research at Cornell has largely been easy to pivot to being online. I mostly work on sort of mathematical or software things, and short of Zoom fatigue, that was a pretty easy pivot. I sometimes go up to the lab to reboot some equipment, but that's about it. But I do want to acknowledge, the pandemic was hugely disruptive for lots of people, and especially undergrads. Last March, everyone went home, and people returned to wildly different home situations, and people's ability to make time for schoolwork and research and all this other stuff was, it impacted different people in wildly different ways. And so I think that's the thing that's on people's mind, beyond the sort of nuts and bolts of like, can I do the research I set out to do, if I'm not on campus. One thing I would add, since the word concerned appeared here, I know there's a lot of anxiety about, how will this affect things like getting admitted to a grad school or, progress with programs. And, I think that people have been trying lots of strategies to make the most of this odd year. And I know that also, at least in CIS, when we do admissions, we moved a few years ago to explicitly trying to assess, how well have people done sort of relative to their opportunities. So that's, in other words, someone who went to Cornell or an MIT, has lots of opportunities, and we look for them to take advantage of those. Someone at a, community college who then transferred to another college had a different path, and they might have a different GPA, they might have, a different set of outcomes. So I'm hopeful that, universities in general will apply that kind of methodology as we're thinking about opportunities for people, say, into graduate programs and beyond. But yeah, it'll take us some time to get out of this, I think, and my thoughts are with everyone at early stages of their career right now.
And Professor Ghosh, would you like to offer perhaps a humanities perspective on this question?
I think everything everyone said. I think it's been a difficult time in a number of ways. On the humanities front, one of the things I will say is that typically students would be able to travel to do research, to find materials, look at paintings that aren't visible digitally. There's been a lot of material digitized so folks can use it, but it's really, in addition to all of the inequalities it's going to generate, there's going to be, in years to come, the communities that can digitize their material are going to have more research done on them. The communities that can't will be understudied. So that goes for languages, art, literature. So that's just something to think about. The other thing I would just say is I think of research, and one of the things that I think is important to think about, especially for after college, is your major and the research that you did here maybe sometimes will lead to what you do later in life. But I also think it's important to think of doing research as a set of skills and competencies that you develop that then that are very versatile and that can be mobilized to do whatever job or whatever career you find yourself in.
Awesome. I think we really covered this question in depth, and thank you all so much for contributing. For this next question, it's pretty broad, and I would love to hear from most of you on this question. So what are some qualities you look for in undergrads looking to join your lab or your research group, or perhaps do research with you? And if we could have perhaps Professor Foster to pitch in first.
Sure. I guess I think of research projects with undergrads, independent work, as going in several different ways, and it doesn't always, different people have different goals. So I know for some people, they're trying to figure out, do I like this intellectual activity of sort of, standing at the edge of the cliff and figuring out which way to jump. Whereas other people are really, trying to maybe, get a result, get a paper, maybe, show that they have a strong resume for applying to grad school. So I do, facilitate lots of different kinds of research experiences. And I always start with a conversation about sort of what the students' goals are. A lot of the work in my group, like many scientists, there are a bunch of skills that are just useful for you to have coming in. And conveniently, many of them are covered in a sophomore level course that I sometimes teach. So although I don't, insist that people have taken that course, it's pretty convenient if people have taken that course, because then I can assume that they can start contributing right away to some of the engineering that we're doing. So that's sort of in terms of like technical skills. And then I guess the other thing that I do is I try to work with as many undergrads as I can, but every undergrad who I agree to work with, I allocate some time every week to meet with them. I often have a PhD or postdoc work with them as well, and there's some limit to how big we can scale. And so I also try to just assess, what are the goals here, and try to create opportunities that will somehow have the most impact.
Professor Ghosh, would you like to offer your some qualities you tend to look for in people looking to research with you?
Sure. I mean, usually I don't work in labs, but one of the things that I do look for, especially for the Humanities Scholars program, is someone who just has an eye for something quirky, and has a really good way of framing what they see, right? Whether they frame it in terms of a big question, or whether they can do a kind of close reading of a detail, right? Because being able to do either of those suggests a certain kind of versatility in terms of how you're able to identify something and say, okay, I found this something and now I'm going to share it with you. And so I look for that. And I know that that's like not in any rubric or matrix, but I think it's one of those things where I really want to reward the student who's kind of creative and excited about doing a research project.
Yeah, would anyone else like to jump in before we move on to the next question?
Maybe I can jump in. This is Avery August. This is a good question. I know many students are asking if there's a special thing that they need to present. Certainly, and this would be individualized for my group. Look for individuals who are curious. It's less critical for us what the major is or whether you've taken a course that is related to our laboratory work, but more important that you have a curiosity and you're really interested in doing research, because that will take you through the ups and downs of doing research in the lab, where there are many failures, but the successes are the ones that keep you going.
All right, awesome. Yeah, thank you all so much for offering your perspectives. Definitely, it was great to hear what you all look for. Yeah, and for the last question, right before we transition to the Q&A, very quickly, I wanted to know, if there's some mistakes that you often see undergraduates commit when looking to get involved in research, things perhaps you would advise people, take more caution against or look into more before getting involved. And I'll give you guys some time to think about this one. I know things may not come to you right away, but feel free to chime in when you have something.
So maybe I can start. This is Xavier August again. So lab-based research is a little bit different. It's hands-on. In our case, we work with mice, and so there's a certain type of student who may not be interested in working with animals for reasons, and that's fine. So one of the first questions I ask students when they're coming to interview whether they want to work in the lab is how comfortable they are working in the lab. So really understanding the type and approach of tools that the lab uses, you can get that from looking at the papers that the lab publishes. But I would say the biggest mistake that I see students coming in talking to me about research is the understanding of coming in and being able to, do exactly what it is that they're interested in doing. In many cases, the laboratory has published that work and no longer works in that space anymore. But also, there are projects that might be available that may not be exactly what the student is interested in. What's more important is to understand and learn how to do the research first. And then at that point, one can then explore projects that might be closer to research interests. So the mismatch between wanting to come in and immediately do the type of research that you want to do, or even come in with your own project, it's very rare that a faculty member will especially in expensive research areas like mine, to sort of take a project that an undergraduate student brings to the lab and work on that, because the lab has these other projects that it's working on that it's funded to do. And so students will have to come in and start there, and perhaps that can then evolve into a project that they're more interested in.
Oh, Professor Saleh, I saw you on mute. I think you wanted to perhaps jump in.
Yeah, so it's I was actually in a way just going to kind of build off of what Professor Ghosh was saying. This is almost kind of like I'm answering the previous question, not this one, but I think in a way it relates to what Professor August was saying as well, where there's but I think sometimes there's preconceived notions about what's going to happen in research and where it's going to lead, and I think often it can be, for me at least, it can be both sides. It can be either you had too specific of an idea coming in about what you wanted to do, or you kind of forced your own interests into somebody else's interests just to get access to the opportunity to publish or things like that. And I think I liked the use of the word quirky that Professor Ghosh used. Like I think there's a way to find a spark in terms of finding the interesting thing in research that you might not have come in with the idea that you were going to have your mind blown on working on something, but if you dig into it enough, you find new things that really might interest you. And so I would say kind of being open-minded in both ways, not having a preconceived notion of what you necessarily want to research, and as Professor August was saying, like learning the methods, learning things like that first, but then also having a little bit of that kind of exploratory nature in the work you're given, and understand that you're growing as a researcher when you do something, and there's ways to kind of you might find. I mean, I've done types of research when I was in my PhD program that I never thought I would have been interested in, like social network analysis and things like that. And then as you're doing it, you're like, oh wow, I didn't know that I had the capacity in my brain to like this kind of thing. And then you find that you do, and it kind of opens up new pathways. And in some ways you end up following those for the next decade of your life, and you never even thought you would be interested in them. So it's kind of like I guess the moral of what I'm saying is just like not being too stodgy in terms of what your outcome is, and thinking more in terms of the exploratory nature of doing research and stuff like that.
I have a couple of things to add. So I guess maybe the first is making time for it. I often get undergrads who show up and saying, I want you to sign this petition so I can take, whatever the limit is, 25 credits or something. And I want, 4 of those to be research. And at least in CIS and engineering, a research experience, independent project is not going to put the same kind of weekly pressure on you as, prelims and projects and so on. And on top of balancing everything else you're doing, you have to make time to, have your quirky thoughts and then, chase down all these dead ends and then find the way forward. And so that's something that I think just kind of time management, in order to get to the final result that's exciting, that's a discovery and a breakthrough, there's a huge, that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a huge effort that's behind that. And so that's just one thing, is kind of simple time management. The other thing that I see a lot is, in sciences at least, having done research is it's not a prerequisite, but it's very helpful for getting admitted to grad school, because someone can write a letter and say, hey, I've been working with this person. They are, basically functioning like a PhD student already, and they're working on open-ended problems and having success. Whether or not you publish a paper or have an actual result, just having done that experience gives some very nice things to say in a reference letter. And so I sometimes see students who have kind of jumped around between maybe 3 different research groups and spent, a semester or a few months with each one. And I'm not sure if people are trying to kind of collect, 3 letters for grad school, but it's the real benefits don't come until, you've gotten over the hump of like getting engaged with some project, and you've been able to get to the frontier and then pose a question, and then you've been able to start to answer that question. And in a field with, tens or hundreds or thousands of years of human thought that went into it, like you're just not going to get to that frontier until you invest a bit of time in it. And so I always encourage students, if they're thinking about, really doing a research project, think about investing a couple semesters in a summer, or, even more, because the benefits get greater as you stick with it. And then one last, sorry to take up so much time, one last thing I've seen sometimes is, I think, especially in the sciences, which can be hierarchical, and there's often these big efforts, and it's kind of unclear what the role of an undergrad is. I think it's very good to kind of keep your wits about you and kind of be aware of the big picture. Don't just go be a cog in some PhD student's experiment run by a postdoc, run by a PI. You're a paying customer, you're a Cornell undergrad, and you're very bright. And I think you might you might be tasked with sort of some grunt work as part of your contribution to the project or your way of getting onboarded. But just keep the big picture and try to be parts of those conversations. That's where a lot of the action is, and you all are capable of being there.
Oh, Professor Ghosh, I wanted to give you a chance also to.
No, I'll be really quick. I think the biggest mistake is probably a version of what Professor Foster said, which is time. So the biggest mistake I see is folks doing a senior project and not getting started until winter break. And then it's like stressful and it's hard and it's, and it's all these things. And, that one of the things that I think we imagine about research is that it requires like genius capacity, and that you're going to get a flash and it's all going to come out. And that's just not often the way it is in any field. So I would do the mistake I often see is that people are waiting for that flash of, brilliance so that they can just like write the 40 pages they're going to write. And that's just not how it's going to turn out. So pace yourself, right? Break it down, give yourself plenty of time to try things out and maybe make some mistakes. And then also revise, write, draft, revise. That thinking time really will make the final product a lot better.
Awesome, amazing. Yeah, thank you all so much for offering your perspectives on these prepared questions. It was amazing to hear from all of you and such diverse experiences. And for the last part of the panel, we'll go ahead and take questions from the audience. So I can see some questions have been being submitted throughout the panel. So I think Victoria will go ahead and help me out and highlight some questions and then ask them from the panel.
Yeah, so you can either type to me in the chat and I can read it out loud, or you can type anonymously in the Q&A if you'd like to be more private, or you can just type with your name exposed, totally up to you. So I guess this can apply to all professors, even though Professor August is already answering this, but if someone's currently working in a lab and they plan to continue in that lab, but then was offered a second research position by another lab over the summer, can you work in more than one lab or research group at the same time.
So I can start to answer the question. I will also put it into the chat. I was saying that it is not the norm to work in two labs simultaneously. I think, one of the things you heard from the others on the panel is the time commitments that it takes. And in many cases, there's a common, it's a bit of a joke, inside joke among the laboratory members is you plan to do something that takes 1 hour and 5 hours later, you're still there. So it's difficult to juggle that with two different places in a research lab. And so usually students will decide if they want to get the experience of the other lab is to make arrangements and have that conversation, get that experience, but do it in one lab at a time.
Does anyone else feel that they should add anything or? Okay, great. Someone asked, is it possible to begin conducting research as a freshman?
Yes. I mean, I think I mentioned before how I don't have any hard requirements, but it's helpful for folks to have taken this particular sophomore level course. I've just in the past I've had first years work with me, and the projects are a little different. But I guess I view it as an opportunity. If there's someone who has that curious spark within them and is able to reach out and plan and get started with something. If things go well, that's potentially a very long collaboration we could have. So that's I always am on the lookout for first years who might be able to contribute.
If no one else has anything to add, I did receive something privately in the chat. Essentially, what does one do if they don't have any prior research experience? How do they go about showing that they're capable of being in a research group in college, and particularly at Cornell? And what advice do you have for being able to reach out to people and show your qualifications without prior research experience?
I don't want to hog the mic, but I guess my standard advice would be, my role as a major advisor, I often have students who are in this boat. They're, haven't had an internship, don't have any research experience, looking for something. And so I think, the advising system, and especially I think here, the kind of student services advising that your college might have, they can be helpful in sort of, for finding programs or structured things, but talking to a faculty member or researcher, I think they can help you get connected with a network and help you kind of discern well, what are your interests? What kinds of things you want to work on? And, we all have pretty broad networks, and I always am delighted when I can make a connection, for someone who's just starting out. Might not be me, but it might even be at Cornell. Last summer, I helped someone in this boat find an internship at Columbia, and basically called some friends. So I think using your social network, and you have a couple of built-in ones. Your professors who have taught you in classes, if you've gotten to know them, done well, had a relationship, that's one avenue, and then I think your advisors are another one.
I have a question that was DM'd to me by an attendee, and it's actually about the Humanities Scholars Program, and it was basically asking for more information. And Professor Ghosh, I think this person is just quite curious for you to talk a bit more at length about the program and how does one apply and things like that.
Sure. So the applications are open to anyone who's a sophomore. So we just closed out the applications for the students who are sophomores now. The next round will be a year from now. We may actually open it up back again because we have a lot of students who find that they're really interested in the humanities in the junior and senior year. Maybe what I'll do is I'll put the link in the chat and you can follow up. But one of the things that we're really interested in is creating a series of courses that have a number of components. And so all of our courses, there's about 20 courses, 20 to 25 cross-listed every semester. So all of them offer some kind of research component, working with some kind of collection. All of them also involve some kind of group project so that you can brainstorm and work with a group on a particular topic that the faculty member designs. A lot of the courses will have a lot of writing, and that writing will be different kinds of writing so that you learn different styles of writing and different styles of expressing yourself. All of the courses are interdisciplinary in some way, even though they're all based in a department, in a single department. And then finally, the other thing we really prioritize is thinking about doing oral presentations, with the idea that learning how to do an oral presentation is a really important way to kind of cognitively think through your ideas. So we curate a group of courses every semester that everyone can take. So you can go on the website and see which courses we've cross-listed if you're interested in that kind of an approach. An approach that's interdisciplinary, that's looking at different genres of thinking. But you can also be part of the program by applying in the sophomore year. We organize for the HSP students what I call a virtual study hall, where basically this is what it looks like. I log on Zoom and I'm on all morning, and students come in and out and they can just work quietly if they want to. We check in every hour and I say, what are you working on? And often just that kind of rhythm of saying out loud what you're working on in the next hour helps you to do the thing you're working on. We organize a bunch of trips, but we also organize larger events for the community, which in which we bring speakers around a particular issue. So we're actually doing an event on May 10th that's open to the whole community, thinking about one of our postdocs is a historian of mathematics. So it's about thinking about how algorithms have been used in the pandemic to make various kinds of public policy decisions, and how those algorithms are culturally and socially informed. So what we're trying to do is inform major events through the humanities. And so we are really looking for students who are interdisciplinary. We're not actually looking for the only humanities student. Nearly all of the students have some really significant interest. So for instance, we have someone who's in infosci and is an archaeologist, someone who's a mechanical engineer who's a music minor. We have folks who are business majors and also literature, interested in literature. We have a lot of creative writers, actually. Cornell, it turns out, Cornell undergrads, a lot of creative writers across the university in different fields. So it's really meant to bring students who have a kind of interest in poking around a particular kind of topic. The idea is to create a community around that and get students talking to each other about their ideas. And one of the big important things is, if you're a student who's in history and you have to present your project to somebody who's in archaeology, it really pushes you to think about how to make your ideas more explicable, right? So I think it's a really fantastic program, but certainly write to me individually if you want to know more, and I'm happy to meet with you.
Thank you so much. We have a question, and since Professor Saleh, you haven't yet spoken at the Q&A, we'd really love to extend this out to you if you have anything to add. What do you look for on a resume with someone with no research experience, or in terms of leadership, volunteer experience, or extracurriculars, and is a cover letter required?
So depends on what the research opportunity is. So it's a little different, I think, so than some of the other people on the panel. A lot of the research that I do is often has a qualitative component to it, or and I know some people on the panel are doing that as well. But so I don't have a specific thing that I look for in terms of volunteer experience, or there's no boxes I'm checking when I look for someone to participate in research. But I think that a couple of the panelists I would almost like make the inverse of what some of the panelists were saying, where they accept people who are from completely different fields to come do lab research. I also have liked in the past working with people who maybe have a more material sciences or hard sciences background and haven't done social science. I find that a lot of those skills are transferable. So if you're worried that maybe you're not ready for some type of extremely, rigorous research, there's I'm doing often, a lot of the research I do is exploratory social science research that's around, qualitative interviews, focus groups, things like that. So if you have those concerns, a lot of those skills I feel like are very transferable. You have systematic ways of looking at problems. I've had students who had, training in formal logic that came in, and I was like blown away by how, it almost like changed the way that I think about problems, because I don't structure my thinking quite that way. So in the same way that you can go, maybe be a sociology major and go work in a biology lab, I would also say you can also be a biology major who can come work on a disability studies social science project, and maybe get something out of it that you weren't expecting. So I tend to look for things like, for me, structured writing and thought is super important. So often if there's a personal statement, that will carry more weight for me than almost anything. So if it looks like you have, a genuine interest, if you're kind of finding the thing in what we've posted that you find, interesting or challenging, that means a lot to me personally, more than GPA and stuff like that. So I would tend to say, relevant experience does matter always, but I love reading personal statements, and I usually find that that's where I find the most connection to the student's work.
Thank you so much. That's super valuable, I'm sure, to so many students who are on this webinar right now. We do want to let you know that it is 6 p.m. So if you do have to go, by all means, we want to be respectful of your time. However, we do have 2 final questions here. So if you are able to stick around, that's great. The first is that if someone's interested in doing an independent project, how willing are professors to oversee the independent research projects of undergrads? Is it preferred to start by being part of someone else's research, perhaps like a more established project, or before starting independent projects? Or what advice do you have regarding that?
So maybe I'll get started, because this is probably the hardest in certainly in the biological sciences. As I was saying earlier, I think this is probably one of the mistakes that many undergraduates make. Is I've had discussions with undergraduates who've approached me with fantastic ideas. It's just not the type of work that we do. We're not equipped to do it. We don't have the equipment. We don't have the funding. And so in every single case, I would say, going back many years and many undergrads, usually the students will come in, work with a senior, either senior undergraduate student or a graduate student on their project, learn the approaches, learn to handle the equipment, et cetera. And then we will then sit down and discuss a more tailored project where that tailors to their interests. So starting, it will usually not be their own project.
Amazing, thank you so much. And then our final question is, do you offer summer research positions or research group or lab tours for students who want to test if the group is a good fit? I would like to preface this by saying that actually the Peer Mentorship Program, all the mentors are sort of, as part of the program, they do provide tours for each of the research groups that they are a part of. So if you are interested in doing that, being part of the Peer Mentorship Program does have that as a part of the program. But it'd be interesting to hear from a professor perspective if that is offered from you guys or the graduate students or anyone who's currently in the lab besides an undergraduate.
So I'll start first. Again, I will say that first, to answer the first question, summer research positions, less likely, solely because many of the students who are in the laboratories tend to stay over, I should say, are in the laboratory over the fall and the spring semester, tend to stay over into the summer. And then we also participate in programs, more formal programs, summer programs that bring in other students from other places. So usually we don't have the space to take students just for the summer. Now, if a student would like to stay longer in the lab, say for a longer term, fall or spring, and want to start in the summer, then we have arranged that. And then with regards to tours, we have done tours, and I know that the graduate students in the lab and the undergraduate students in the lab do conduct tours outside of COVID, of course, under normal circumstances.
Does anyone else have something to add? Okay, Arsen, if you'd like to wrap up, I'm just going to be answering the question about the Peer Mentorship Program in the Q&A.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank again our wonderful panel of professors who volunteered their precious time to help us educate people about undergraduate research and tell us more about what they've been working on as well. It's been I have to say, it's an amazing pleasure to have all of you here and to, like I said, volunteer your time. It was really amazing to hear from all of you and all of your diverse perspectives in your fields and your experiences as well. So thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, if we could do a virtual round of applause for our panelists here, and to all the attendees, thank you so much for joining us. A recording of this session will be available on our YouTube channel as well. I'll quickly paste the link to CURB's website. You can go ahead and check us out and see how we help you guys get involved in research. But like I said, again, thank you so much to our amazing panel of professors who have volunteered so much of their time to help us out. So thank you all so much. Professor Saleh, Professor Foster, Professor Ghosh, Professor August, thank you all so much for joining us. Yeah. All right, everyone. Thank you and have a great evening.